Welcome back to RGV History Revisited. I'm Marlene Rodriguez. For those of you just tuning in, we looked at an old ancient bridge that took years to be discovered, and now we're going to the old Brownsville Cemetery to look at those who served in the War of 1812. Let's watch.
Brownsville and Old City Cemetery here has the distinction in the country as having a combatant from every war that the United States has been involved with the exception of the American Revolution. But you had the second generation of people that were buried in this particular cemetery that their fathers actually fought in the American Revolution. Now that is very, very distinct when it comes down to what you call the Western expansion states out here. Brownsville is very old in that regard. Brownsville was founded 60 years after the American Revolution, but its generation still carried over in the likes of John Roach Butler. He was a combatant in the War of 1812. We have three combatants that were involved in the War of 1812, which was the next major war after the American Revolution. Bear in mind that the War of 1812, we almost reversed all of our gains that we had accomplished during the American Revolution. The American Revolution lasted until 1783, but the British still were involved after the Revolution with trying to regain their territory in what was eventually the United States, or the 13 original colonies. They burned Washington, D.C. in the War of 1812. That was the very war that Captain Butler was involved with. Captain Butler was born in 1795. Now, that in itself points out the fact that we have people in this cemetery that were born in the 18th century. He was a young ensign in the Navy in the War of 1812 up on the East Coast. He was from the Philadelphia area. But he survived that, and then he settled in New Orleans. And then in New Orleans, there was the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. He was involved in that one, too. So once he got out of New Orleans at the time of just prior to the Civil War, then he came to South Texas, and he became the port captain of Brazos, Santiago, which was our port here. The old families that are registered in this cemetery, you have the Cumminses, you have the Douglases, you have the Renfros. There's a plethora of old families. Those old families stemmed from the Northeast, from the original colony. For that matter, Stephen Powers and his family came from Massachusetts. You had people that were involved in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, such as myself, and other families of the old families that were here that were very, very active in the American move for independence and the preservation of the independence after that. Of the combatants that were involved in the War of 1812, there are three that have been researched to be known to have fought in that war, one of which is Captain Butler. The other one is Captain Sanford Kidder, who was a scout afterwards for Zachary Taylor when he came through. And then there's one more in here that's still being attempted to be identified. When you have independence of any country, it is a tenuous fact, and that's why we remained with combatants for the wars that followed the American Revolution. You don't just stand on your independence and say, I've got it, well then it's here forever. No. Every time that there was someone trying to erode away to the American independence, we had people from South Texas that stepped up in order to protect that cause.
Well, there you have it. Even though we were so far away from where the War of 1812 took place, we still managed to be part of that important part of American history. Next, we're going to look at an old piece of land that is so important to the history of not just the Rio Grande Valley, but South Texas, coming up after the break.